Hi, I'm Scott Bekins. I'd like to introduce you to a program called Pastor Partners that I think can make a huge difference for God's church. Joining me today are the two pastors that have helped me prove and test this program, Pastor John Kenny and Pastor Bill Rudd.
Hi, I'm John Kenny, and I am the pastor of the First Reformed Church in Grand Haven, Michigan. And I am here today with Scott Bekins and Pastor Bill Rudd to share a little bit about the Pastor Partner Project that Scott launched this past year and that Bill and I have had an opportunity to be a part of. It began this past year when Scott, who's friends with both of us, came to the realization after having conversations with us that as a solo pastor, I was struggling to do all the things that needed to get done, and just all the things that are common with being a solo pastor. Too much to do, not enough time, trying to meet all these deadlines and not getting to the bigger things I wanted to do. And at the same time, talking to Bill, his former pastor, and Bill recently retired and was looking to still be involved in ministry and to do something, but was looking for some flexibility, and there was a reason you chose to retire. So Scott, very much I think inspired by the Holy Spirit, thought, well, what if this guy and this guy could somehow come together and work together, that not only would it be a blessing for both of us, but more importantly, it would be a blessing for the church. And that's what we've been a part of for the past year, and today we're going to tell a little bit about that story of what it's looked like.
Thanks, John. You know, Pastor Partner is focused on solo pastored churches. And about 80% of the churches in America are solo pastored. And another statistic that you shared with me was that about 80% of the churches in America are either stagnant or declining. And I think that there is a direct correlation between those. And that's what makes Pastor Partner so powerful, because it really gets to the core problem that I think the church has today, or one of the core problems the church has today, and that is pastor fatigue. And that when you're the solo pastor, it's you all the time, 24/7. The buck stops with you. There is not another person that can share the burden. And when I saw that and recognized how much you didn't need another program, you needed help. You needed someone to help carry the load. And knowing that there were wonderful people out there like Pastor Bill, who had this tremendous amount of experience that could come in and help carry that load.
Yeah, absolutely. There's really unique struggles to being a solo pastor, and unique blessings as well. But one of the most challenging things is what you said. It's that singular demand, and each week there's a message to preach, and whether it's visitation or teaching or basic administration of the church, that as a solo pastor, I or whoever else we're a very limited resource, and by the end of the week we haven't gotten nearly done all the things that we would like to do. And in my experience, it's the things that we're not getting to are the really strategic things that would really change the culture of the church, that would, take the church from that plateau or decline trajectory and to move it up, because I don't always have time for that, because there's so many things that have to get done now this week, and often there's no one else to do it. So that has been just a need and a struggle I've had in the 10 plus years that I've been here, and Pastor Partner has really, as we're going to talk about, has really helped to address that.
And you hit on one of the core points about the plateauing and the declining, and that if you look at the cycle of a church from a church plant, and when it's new and it's fresh, and you talked about how you're not worrying about all the administration things because you're small and you're growing and you're excited and you're connecting with people and you're building the church. But then the reality is that it comes to a point where you're limited resources and you can't do everything. And so the things that suffer are often the connections, the things that make people feel connected to the church. And if there isn't the ability to get beyond that point of a solo pastored church to where you have additional professional staff, you'll get to the point where the pastor will get burned out. Mm-hmm. And there are so many programs out there that are specifically designed for treatment of pastors who have experienced burnout. Everything from sabbaticals to counseling, but there are really none that I've found that get at the core of prevention, of ever having the pastors get to that point where they need that type of help. Because once they get to that point of fatigue and burnout, it's really hard to get that back. But if you can prevent them from ever getting there, it just makes all the sense in the world. And that's really, with Pastor Partner, it prevents that point where the church plateaus or declines because the pastor can't do anymore.
Well, I think what research has shown, and kind of my own experience has shown in my own ministry and in the ministry of many of my friends, is that the pastor's own spiritual health and his own journey or her own journey is inherently tied to the overall health and vitality of the congregation. You can't really pull those two apart, and that when the pastor is tired and worn, that's going to directly impact the congregation. I mean, how can it not? And what Pastor Partner has been able to do is to really help me get past that sticking point, is to push past beyond that through Bill's really wonderful, helpful, experienced wisdom and involvement and engagement in our congregation. And just in the time we've been doing this, we've been able to take on projects that had been just sitting on my desk or in my head for a while, and we're now getting some traction. And so I think that's what this is all about. It's not just about coming to the aid of the pastor, it's coming to the aid of the pastor for the sake of the church and for growth and its future health.
It was so obvious when I first began working here that it wasn't a lack of vision on your part at all. You had the vision, but just not the time to be able to devote to developing that. And you mentioned about a church plant and how often it reaches a certain point, and then institutionalization tends to come in, and now there's a lot more balls in the air that you've got to keep going. But even in a long established church, the same issue hits. In fact, it has an additional element. At least in a church plant, you had momentum. That momentum tends to get slowed down then when you hit that place where one person can't do it all anymore. In an established church, often the momentum has been gone for years. And so it's like the solo pastor has to keep all of the balls in the air that were there for the last 50 years, but then he's supposed to also be this change agent that comes in and gets momentum back. And I don't know how a person all by themselves can possibly do that.
And so people might be asking or thinking, well, why doesn't a church just hire an associate pastor? You know, if the solo pastors are that busy and they're that overworked, why not just hire another pastor? And I see clearly that a lot of the reason that doesn't happen is you have your staff, or I should say your volunteers, who are your consistory or your elders or your governing board, that are responsible for making sure that the church meets budget and that they're fiscally responsible. And it seems to be pretty traditional where a church doesn't hit its budget until right at the last minute. That there's, and I can say that it seems like in the congregation, people want to make sure everybody else is paying their fair share before they bail something out. There's an old saying that a friend of mine told me, you keep them humble and we'll keep them low, which really resonated with me when I heard that, because I didn't understand just how prolific this feeling of people wanting to make sure they're getting something for their money, even when it comes to giving to God. And so the thought of, well, I'll wait and see how they do on the budget before I give more, because I don't want to give too much, or they'll think that they've got extra money they can do something with. That very feeling from the people in the congregation causes the people in the leadership of the church to very much be apprehensive about saying, well, we're not going to go call another pastor when we're not sure we can afford him or her. And the last thing we'd want to do is call someone and then realize that there isn't the money there that we hoped for, and so we have to let them go. Because that's a huge thing, to rip somebody's family out of somewhere and transplant them and then not be able to support them and their family. So those two things are what really cause the church to not be able to nudge beyond that plateau of solo pastor, and why I believe that 80% of the churches in America are still solo pastored when probably a lot of them shouldn't be. A lot of them should have more staff, more help. So one of the great things about the Pastor Partner program is that it's a project. And Bill, I know you really helped develop this for me when I thought about Pastor Partner and how the project-based funding of Pastor Partner would help get that church beyond this point. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I watched for years people who felt that God had called them to be a missionary, go to some very needy place, but in many church traditions they have to raise support by going around to churches and asking their friends and their family and to pledge to give X dollars per month, and once they get the required amount, then they can go and do their ministry. Part of the difficulty is the economy, which fluctuates, and I think today people are much more careful about making a long-term commitment if they're not sure that the budget will continue to be there. But beyond that, we have a real change, a sea change in the makeup of the donor. The baby boomer generation, and especially the generation before that, they had the mentality of we're going to give our tithe or whatever their amount is to the church every Sunday. If we're on vacation, we'll still bring it the next week. If there's a snowstorm, we're going to put it in the next week. And frankly, it doesn't matter whether things are up or down in the church. That's just the way they grew up, and they're going to keep giving it all the time. Well, you can build a budget and you can build commitments on that. But younger generations are much more interested in a short-term commitment. They love to have a project that they can give to where they know what's going to happen and there's a time frame and maybe some goals in there. And so at the end of the project they can say, well, look what my gift did.
They feel more connected to it.
Exactly. And they're not committing the family farm for the next 20 years in doing so. And of course, many times then they're very willing to re-up.
Right, because they saw results.
It worked, so we'll do it again. But that kind of project-oriented giving, you can't have a church solely on that. You have to have the regular giving for the budget and planning, but often it's the new thing that a creative form of giving can really help to launch.
And the thing that I loved when you told me about that is that it really resonated with why you see things like a sanctuary rebuild or a new church being built or a well being put in. And you can have a church that may have an operating budget that just barely gets made every year. But then when they redo the sanctuary and they have this capital campaign, it happens.
Yes.
And why is it that there's all that available giving money that can barely make the budget every year, but when you have this capital campaign, it all comes in? It's because it's a project that people get invested in, they get tied to, and they know that it's a definitive timeline, and they know that they're going to see a result, a definitive result. They're going to be able to see it and touch it. So when you talked about, instead of a missionary that might say, hey, fund me $50 a month forever, will you fund me $3,000 to go and plant a church this year? Or go dig a well and to preach to these people who are in dire need of just hydration? That has a definitive time frame and has a good result that they can see. They can get connected to that. And that to them is more powerful at giving.
I've been amazed to see times when in that particular season of our church, there just was no interest in increasing the budget no matter how much the good thing was. It just didn't seem like good stewardship of the resources. But if we had a special speaker come in who had a particular project that they believed in, I would have thought that our congregation was all given out. And all of a sudden the special offering brings in hundreds or sometimes thousands of dollars because they were touched by it.
Well, I think the thing with Pastor Partner Project that I really appreciate is we talk about capital campaigns and raising money. If we had a crack in the foundation of this building that we're in right now, and we said we have to fix it or the building's going to crumble, people would invest in that. Or if we had a big hole in the roof over us, we would raise the money and we would get that fixed, because it's, we don't want to be in the open air here in Michigan in the, the winter. When we talk about Pastor Project, for me it's, if you're willing to invest in brick and mortar, what about the ministry? What about that instead of, your money, as much as it would be needed to put on, plaster and new carpeting or things like that, what if that meant new ministries? What if that meant a change of culture? What if that meant the things that have been on the back burner of this church for years were now actually getting done?
Or the things that were so strategically important that always got put on the back burner could now come to the front burner.
Absolutely.
And you talked about the renewal of the pastor and how important that is. It doesn't take much thinking to recognize that if a solo pastor is exhausted from the relentlessness of the ministry and a sermon every Sunday, and all of a sudden there's an opportunity for some relief there, for him to actually spend a little more time with his kids and his wife at home, that's energizing. And John, you talked about a recent week when
Yes.
something opened up.
Yeah, it was a weekend when Bill was preaching, and I had done something that I hadn't done, and I couldn't even remember how long. I took a weekday off. It was a Friday, and it was glorious. I really enjoyed it, and that's just space to breathe and to catch up. We're busy on weekends with our church families, and so it can feel relentless. And I love being a pastor, and I love the congregation I serve, but at the same time, it's just hard. And there's so much turnover in ministry. Different statistics say, 3-4 years, kind of about on average. 4 might even be a very
The upper end.
The upper end of that. And
Now, when you say turnover, do you mean people moving or getting out of the ministry?
just leaving, you're leaving the church you're serving, whether it's you're moving on or you're moving out of ministry.
Tenure of the average senior pastor has actually been going up a little bit, but it's still below 4 years. Now,
Below 4 years?
yes, imagine now, Pastor John's been here
Almost 11.
almost 11.
Yeah.
I was 33 years at the church I retired from. So think how we skew the average.
Right.
For the average to be 4 years and less, there are just a ton of pastors who are only there for 18 months, a year and a half. You can't get anything done like that. And often they're burned out, they're exhausted, their family is tired of their not being there. And they're frustrated because they don't have time for the visionary, strategic things that is what excited them about being in the ministry.
And I think that's the thing we talk about, most pastors are solo pastors. The average tenure is just a couple of years. There isn't this rapid turnover because things are going so well and they're feeling like this is somewhere they want to be for a long time, and they're able to put together a vision with their congregation and live it out. It's either there's too much, or this is just too hard on my family, or any number of things, and people are just the turnover. And I've shared with you that, and the group of friends I had in seminary, among the 5 of us, within about 5 years, 3 of the 5 were out of ministry. And
So only 2 of your group, you and one other person, are still in ministry?
Yes. And what I found that, for seminary graduates, I'm not sure the exact statistics, but that's not that uncommon.
No.
That isn't,
So 60%.
well, of that small sample, yes, but.
Well, and think of this. Here's a solo pastor, and let's say there are some things that are difficult in the particular church that they're in. If he's a solo pastor, guess what? He's isolated and he's alone, or he's isolated and she's alone. Though you have loving congregational members,
They really have no one safe to talk to.
they don't have someone safe to talk to. Those people are not in ministry. They don't understand, just like I can't understand your job, Scott, as a CEO of a company, because I'm not there. So often, I think pastors leave prematurely as a result of the isolation and not having someone there to be beside them and help them during that difficult period. That's certainly not been our situation, but
But these are real world situations of a solo pastor, because you don't have that other associate pastor
There's not
to
a
go
safe
talk
person
to.
you can dump on and talk through and come up with ideas and have hope.
And you just think of the impact that would then have on the church that they have just left. Is they're leaving after 2-3 years, so probably not a whole lot of transformation or cultural change has happened. They're going to be without a pastor for a while, and churches aren't really growing and thriving during those times without pastoral leadership. And then another person comes in and they're there for a few years, and they're probably half trying to undo what the guy before them did, and half trying to do their own stuff, moving forward. And then they're there 3 to 4 years, and then they leave, and you can see why there is this 80% plateau decline. It's built into the system that we've created.
And so really that turnover causes a lack of connection with the congregation, and causes, to a degree, what I call anonymity, where the people in the congregation don't feel that they're known by the pastor. But all of that starts with the fact that the solo pastor has way too much on their plate. And so they get burned out, and then the turnover starts, and that just increases the problem with not knowing and connecting with your congregation. But it all started with the fact that there came a point that solo pastor just couldn't handle everything on their plate. And that's really the core problem that I see with those 80% of the churches that are solo pastored, and certainly the ones that are stagnant or declining, is that it always lies back at the pastor. And without revitalization of the pastor, you can't possibly have revitalization in the church.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that that's why Pastor Partner Project is such an ingenious solution to that. And at least it certainly has been for me, because our church was not in a position where we could hire a full-time associate pastor. That just was not a reality. And I think right now there's that dichotomy. Either that's your option, or you stay put where you're at, and there is no help. And that's a terrible place to be in, because it's like neither one is really anything.
Because certainly the staying put one, that doesn't end well.
And this one is, for most, I'd say, overwhelming majority of churches, this other one is just not realistic.
From a cost perspective.
Yeah, from a cost perspective. So what do you do? Where what is out there? And I think that's where Pastor Partner Project is. It's so simple, it's so ingenious, and it's so effective, because it really brings to the solo pastor that help, that push to get beyond the point of being stuck. And certainly that's been true here and true of our relationship. And I am tremendously grateful, Bill, for your work here, and for what this relationship has meant to me, because not only have you done work, but you have been that safe place and that other shepherd. We've talked about this, that I love my congregation, and it's a beautiful congregation to lead, but it's tough as a shepherd to go to the sheep to ask for kind of direction. And but with you, you've been there, you've done it, you've seen it, all that. And then when you and I can talk, you bring ideas to the table that I didn't have. And up until then, it was my ideas, and now it's your ideas and mine, and we're feeding off of each other.
Oh, yes.
It's been fabulous.
The brainstorming has been exciting, because it's not like I brought in this package. Often you had the startup vision, and then just as the two of us talked about it together, we're bouncing off each other, and your idea and my idea and our idea, and it's just, and maybe this might be a good place for me to say something about the benefit to the retired pastor.
Well, I think that's the other key side of pastor partners, and that there's the solo pastor on one side, and there's the retired pastor on the other side. Yeah. So, Bill, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges you see as you came upon retirement and now are retired, even though you're still working, just not to the same level you were, because you shared with me a lot of the things that I didn't realize, and I'm sure a lot of people don't realize, face a pastor as they come up on retirement.
Yes. And I can speak perhaps not just from my experience, but from many pastors that I know and have interacted with over the years, and probably even more so as I've approached that age. But there certainly are pastors who feel stuck in the ministry, much as they love it, much as they appreciate it. They're hitting a point where they're getting tired. They don't have the same energy level that they did once, and that's hard on them, and they know it's hard on their church. But often they feel a bit trapped. Now, every denomination, of course, is different and what their setups are. Some denominations have excellent retirement program planning, and so a pastor isn't caught financially. But there are many pastors who are approaching retirement age and they have nothing. Perhaps they lived in a parsonage, they don't even own a home.
And if the denomination didn't have a very specific plan, it likely the consistory or the elders may not have put together a plan for that pastor. And certainly when you guys go to seminary, they probably don't give you a class on how to save for retirement.
No, I'm pretty sure that.
By the way, for a solo pastor, it's a very difficult thing for him to sit down with his board or constituency and say, you need to take care of me.
Right.
And when I was
when it comes to retirement.
Yes. When I was a senior pastor with a staff, then I could go to bat for my staff and say, we need to have a retirement program for them, and of course I can get the benefit. So the financial issue wasn't the primary one for me at all, though some extra income is wonderful. But think about that pastor again who feels caught. It's not just because maybe he's financially concerned. The only thing he's ever done in his life is pastor, and he loves it. And to think about suddenly be cut off from this position when he loves to minister, he loves to work with people, he loves to try to plan strategic things, and then it's done. And he doesn't have a plan. He's perhaps at an age where another pastorate is, well, people aren't typically looking for 65 or 70-year-old new pastors.
Yeah, that's the thing that shocked me too, is how there's that concept almost of an expiration date.
Exactly.
Like there becomes a loss of relevance.
Well, the church is saying we want to reach young people, so we're going to bring in this 75-year-old man to be our pastor. It just doesn't work that way.
There's such a wealth of experience and knowledge from that retired pastor that they could hand down to this new generation of young pastors who are making the same mistakes they made and that could learn in a much easier way.
Doing it wrong is a great teacher. Especially if you can learn it from somebody else doing wrong instead of yourself.
As a retired pastor, though, the reality, or a pastor that is retiring, is that most of them still need to have an income of some sort, but they want flexibility. They don't want that pressure of having to do a sermon every Sunday like Pastor John has, where you're on all the time. They want some flexibility. They want to be able to enjoy their time with their family, enjoy their retirement, but they still need to be able to make some money, because it's pretty rare that a pastor can retire without any concern whatsoever from a financial standpoint. So that's the very pragmatic side of it, is I've still got to make some money somehow. And I think that it's not that you aren't fine with being a greeter at Walmart if that's what's necessary to make ends meet, but you've served God your entire life. You have such a skill set. You have such experience with that is so valuable, and you know it, and you know that you have that skill set. How can I pass that on? How can I be so worthwhile yet to God's church while still having flexibility and being able to make enough that I can support my family in my retirement? And that's, talking with you, I realized how hard it is to actually find the ability to serve God, the ability to make money, and the ability to stay flexible with your retirement.
And if I had to make a list of what has been most exciting to me about this, at the top would be my relationship with John and the new friendship and ministry partnership we have. But near the top would be the flexibility, because I retired for a reason. I didn't want to keep putting in those 60 and 80 hours weeks every week. And I wanted to spend more time with my family, my wife and my grandchildren, without the pressure of having to then stay up later every night to get the work done. So that flexibility, and it's not simply that I'm part-time, it's also that it's not 2 to 4 every day, that flexibility, and I can fit around John's schedule because I am retired and have that flexibility. But let me add something else that was an unexpected benefit of this. I don't think I've even shared this with you. When you've been in a ministry for a long time, you're used to the setting, you've tried lots of things, you have your frustrations and your blessings and rewards. There's something about a new place that re-energizes your vision. It's like if you suddenly started another company, you know, there's a freshness, an excitement, it's all new. And I get to do that, you know, and still be retired and flexible.
And I imagine it's the same for you.
Oh, it's been fantastic. Like you said, up until now, it's been just trying to figure out things and trying to communicate with my board and my ministry team leaders. And but I realize they're volunteers and they're already giving a lot and trying to really push the bigger strategic initiatives, really pushing really kind of a broad cultural changes that we need. They're just not available really time-wise to do that. And they may be very proficient as teachers or nurses, whatever it is, business people. Bill comes in with, you know, decades of knowledge and experience and success in ministry. And that's really what I needed. And it's been just great. You'd said this earlier, Scott, that what I needed was not more programs. I needed help. And that's exactly what Bill has been for me. It's been a help to realize things that we've been wanting to accomplish. And
you didn't need a mentor program that had to fit in your schedule somewhere and take more time up. You needed someone to shoulder the load. You needed someone to take some of the heavy lifting so that you could do those other things you always wanted to do.
Yes, I mean, and that was, you know, the kind of the image of like the two ox pulling the yoke together. That's kind of like, you know, one of the reasons the church may have been plateauing or not as healthy as it could have been because, you know, I'm just one ox and I can only pull so hard or so fast before I wear out.
Well, if the pastor is plateauing, the church is going to plateau.
Absolutely, that's the connection. And so what if there was a way to get around that and to bring somebody in to do some of that pulling alongside in a way that would be financially doable, but you'd get, you know, for lack of a better way of saying it, a big bang for your buck. And that's been our experience here at First Reformed Church with Bill, and we couldn't be happier about the arrangement.
You know, one thing, John, that I think was just so exciting for me was when I got started and you began to talk about some of your vision, you'd had a vision for a particular ministry for a number of years. Mm-hmm. And it was, I don't know what percentage, but a good deal of that vision was formed. And it was an exciting thing for outreach and bringing young families into the church. And it wasn't that you didn't have ideas. You had wonderful ideas. You just didn't have time to take it to the next step and get it launched.
Yeah, and I'd had a number of questions that I could not, I kept coming back up, and how am I going to do this, and well, what about this, and what about the demands that's going to be on my time, because I'm already short on time. This is going to cost more time, but it's really valuable. This would help us get unstuck. And having you be able to process that with me, and you did a lot of the legwork of doing some calling, and required me to do some extra training. But what was great about that was you were covering the pulpit, so I could get some of that extra training. So it really worked out fabulously, and I've done a little bit of the promoting. You've helped out with that, driving around and contacting people and getting the word out. It's just been fantastic.
That's why it's called Pastor Partners.
Yes.
The key verse that I feel speaks to the incredible powerfulness of Pastor Partner is Luke 10, It says, "After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them on ahead of him, 2 by 2. Not one, 2 by 2. That's the first part of that verse that I think is so important, and one of the reasons why Pastor Partner is so effective at helping the solo pastored church, because Jesus didn't send them out 1 by 1. He sent them out 2 by 2 so that they had each other to rely on. They had each other to bounce ideas off from, to have their backs, to make sure that they were much stronger 2 by 2 than they were 1. And it goes on to say, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few," which I think hits on another key point about Pastor Partner, is the fact that in today's culture, there is far less time available when it comes to a volunteer standpoint. Solo pastored churches in generations past relied very heavily on congregation and on volunteers, and they still do today. The problem is that the time constraints on those volunteers has ramped up exponentially. Look at the world we live in today, where people pay for lawn care, they pay to have their groceries shipped to their home, they pay for dry cleaning, they pay for meals delivered in a box that you can prepare at home. Why are there all these services available to us today that you never heard of 10 or 20 years ago? It's because we're all trying to buy time. It's the one thing that we all have less and less of, is time. So when you look at a church that is a solo pastored and everybody else is volunteers, and their lives become much more demanding and constrained, and their time becomes so much more valuable to them, and they have less of it, and they start spending money to save time by having somebody do different tasks for them, that's going to correlate to them having less time to spend with the church. They're going to have less time to do the things that you as a solo pastor really need them to do. And they're going to be doing it at the end of their workday. They're burned out, they're tired.
Yeah, and one of the challenges with that I've seen is, who are we asking to volunteer? It's, is it young families, parents of young families? Well, I don't really think the best place for them to be is at church meetings a couple nights a week. They should be home, and even more so when you have teenagers, or then you look well, what about the folks who their kids are older, they're grown and they're home, and well, they may not have as much energy, or sometimes you hear, well, I've done my share, or they go to Florida or Arizona for 4 months a year, and you realize people are strapped for time, and they're working so hard, and they do love the church. It's not that they don't care, it's just they're spent physically, emotionally, and time-wise. And so, again, that just puts the pastor, that puts the church in a difficult position to move forward.
Imagine a single parent family. The pressures on the single parent are just gigantic, beyond many of our ability to conceive. And for them then to volunteer their evenings or their weekends is very hard. In most families now, you have two people who are in the workforce rather than one, as it was decades ago. And so once again, people are exhausted, their schedule is full, and it's just very difficult. And then, of course, from the pastor's standpoint, he has some of the same dynamics. I mean, he has plenty to do during the day to prepare messages, to counsel people, and all of the details of administration. The last thing he needs, or she needs, is to spend 4 evenings a week in the evening when
meeting with the volunteers who can only meet then because they're working during the day.
But typically the pastor has a family also, and needs to.
And their family events are often at night, if it's school plays or if it's different things like that.
So the beauty of this is, as a retired person with flexibility, if the best time for John to meet is at 2 o'clock on Friday, hey, I can do this. And it doesn't take away from his family or my goals in my retirement years either.
So with the issue of a solo pastored church having less available volunteerism, meaning that there isn't as much time, energy to spend as congregation members helping the church, then that puts even more pressure on the solo pastor, because he can't count on consistent commitment, because it becomes tertiary to a degree. It becomes, well, you know, after all these other things that are a commitment, financial-wise, family-wise, then I'll give what I have left over, which of course isn't the best.
And it's not really what you can build, a movement on. You can't build momentum on that. But I'm also very sympathetic, because I have 2 teenage boys and a young daughter, and I understand where these families are at, and I don't hold it against them that they say we're just not able to give the time that we would like to give.
It's a reality of the culture that we're in today.
It's absolutely.
And so I think a lot of that, when you're as busy as people are today and you don't have the time to volunteer, you also don't have the time to get connected. Mm-hmm. And because not enough people volunteer, the pastor is overworked and he doesn't have time to connect back with the people to make them feel like they're not just some anonymous person sitting in the pew. They actually matter, and the pastor cares about them. And that's, I believe, one of the key issues with engagement, especially in some of the younger people in a church, is that they don't feel engaged because they're not known. They're anonymous.
And I think that Bill's experience here, his time that he's put in, has really helped, especially on the weeks where you've done some preaching, and which has just been fabulous. Because we've changed the model of how we do discipleship around this church. And it used to be much more we just do preaching and then classroom kind of Sunday school sort of things. And we found that over time that not too many people's lives are changed or transformed at a Sunday school class. Right. But if you put them in groups of 1s or 2s or 3s and you have meaningful time together and you can be more honest and open and really dig into some things, life change happens. So I've been wanting to do that and spend more time in some different opportunities that we offer at our church for really 2s and 3s kind of discipleship. And I've been able to do that this year since you've been on board, because I now have that time. So it is that I'm able to connect better because I'm not always trying to juggle some things. I really have time that I can carve out of my schedule, so I can spend that one-on-one, one-on-two times, take a longer lunch kind of a thing, and really do some heart-to-heart discipling.
I'm sure not everyone would understand not only the relentlessness of preaching, but the time commitment. There certainly are pastors who are able to step into the pulpit and have only thought about it for an hour, and usually you can tell, but there are some unusually gifted people who can do that. But today, people's expectation for communication is very different. They're seeing the best communicators in the world
because
in the
we
media,
have access to them all.
Have access to them all. And so for a pastor to feed his congregation in relevant biblical ways requires a good deal of research. It's like doing a research paper every single week. But it's not simply that you've done the research and have the information. Now you've got to package it in a way that works in today's culture. And the relentlessness of that every Sunday, as we said recently, it's not like at noon on Sunday.
Yeah, it's not like you're going on summer vacation.
Yes.
I always find Sunday afternoon, the ride home, to be one of the most it's both like things went well this morning, and then it's like that, oh no, like tomorrow morning I'm back in the office at 7:30. Yeah, now what? And I don't know about your experience, but for me, and other research shows this bears true, for pastors who are kind of doing their due diligence in exegesis and writing and preparation and research and, as you said, packaging. It's about 20 hours a week is kind of a fair assessment. So
Just to prepare for the sermon?
yeah, that's the sermon. So
that's half of a normal working person's week, just to prepare for the sermon, not including.
well, and it seems like a lot of time, but yet, I think that, Scripture is pretty clear that the gospel advances on preaching. It's when the word of God is heard, that's how it's received. And this is really a primary way of not just sharing the gospel, but building up the congregation. So we do invest a lot of time in preaching because that's a primary calling to ministry. So it needs that kind of time.
And creativity cannot be forced.
You can't sit down and make yourself do it right now.
It requires time. It requires, the ability to maybe forget everything a little bit so it can, like a good stew that simmers for a while. A sermon has to do that. But when every Sunday it's there, during my ministry years here, I preached way too much. And only in the last decade did I begin to recognize that I was not just cheating myself and my family, I was cheating the congregation.
How many years have you?
Basically 50 years. I started when I was 2. But when I began to have someone else in the pulpit more frequently, my creativity levels just went up because now I had time. I wasn't under the pressure of another sermon.
The quality went up when the quantity went down.
The quality goes up when the quantity comes down.
And can I tell you, just a great blessing for me is that when you preach, I get to sit with my family in worship. And I get to pastors know that happens rarely, and that I get to sit with them and be blessed and to receive and to be built up and encouraged and to be challenged. And I also think it's great that my congregation hears another voice. I've been here almost 11 years. I was at, so that's over 500 sermons. So when I stand,
but who's counting?
When I get up to preach, my voice is, they know the shepherd's voice very well. But how much more helpful it is for them to hear the voice of somebody else. Who you may connect better with them than I do because you just come at it a different way.
Different.
It's a different voice,
yes.
and that's just been really helpful.
Well, and I know since I'm not preaching every Sunday, like when I listen to your messages just in the last month, that feeds my creativity and it feeds me as a person as well. And you mentioned that, let me just say, my wife has sat alone in church for 50 years. Because I was preaching too often, and my children. And so, as John mentioned, to be able to sit with your wife and to sit with your kids, and
something that everybody like us takes for granted every week.
But the flip side of that, the church benefits from that. You don't see the immediate benefit, but if I'm a better person, if I have a stronger marriage, if I'm being fed and not just feeding, they will benefit from it as well.
Revitalization of the church starts with revitalizing the pastor.
Absolutely.
We talked about the funding model and about how so many churches plateau and don't take that leap of faith to hire an associate pastor to help the senior pastor because they're concerned that they won't be able to make the budget. And one of the things that Pastor Partner does is package that into a project, like a church sanctuary remodel, where it's got a defined timeline and it has defined benefits. So Pastor Partner actually helps the pastors, the partner pastor and the senior pastor, to create a menu of these are the types of things that we would benefit from, that we need your help with. And you can put some quantities of hours down so you have an understanding of the cost and the benefit. And then you can go to the congregation and ask them to help fund this project, which they can see has a timeline, they can see has definitive benefits. And one of the other great things about this model is that in every congregation, I would bet, there is at least 1 or 2 people who would catch this vision enough that if you went to them and said, here's what I'd like to do, and we want somebody to be a match partner. So we want somebody who will say, I think that is awesome, and I think that's a great concept, and it can get our church over this hump where we can start to grow again. And so I'll match the first 50% of whatever that project costs. So then when you present this project to the congregation, you can not only show the great benefits of this project, but you can say, and we have somebody who's going to match 50%, so it's already half paid for. Mm-hmm. And if we can just collect the other half, we can start this project.
Yeah, and I think that was such a good way to go about this, because it's, are we going to just keep paying this guy until, Jesus comes back? Are we just going to, was this forever on the budget? And when this was presented, not only did we start with that match, but very quickly we hit it and then went over what we were asking. And I thought we would get a good response. And I was really surprised at how many people were like, yes, this is something I really would like to get involved in. And so when Bill and when we first started meeting, I set out 3 things that Bill and I wanted to accomplish with him. One was in an area of evangelism we've talked about. One was in an area of discipleship. And I said, Bill, I've read this book. I love the way it packages discipling people. Our church is really struggling to be a disciple-making factory, helping people grow in faith. What would you think? And then Bill and I, kind of the brainstorming back and forth, came up with this campaign to do it over 6 weeks. And then one of your ideas was, what would be great is if there was a daily journal, a devotional that everybody could do, and it would tie the readings with scripture reading and what was being preached on the weekends and application. And I'd said, Bill, that's great. I have absolutely no time. Like, how am I going to write this 40-day devotional that's supposed to be starting in 2 months? And then you said, oh, no problem. That's what I'm going to do. And that was just incredible. And then I also wanted some help with some pulpit, so I could work with some leadership development, that I could have time to do some discipling. And we've been able to do all those things. We really accomplished quite a bit. And now we're already looking into our next phase. And what I'm excited about with this next phase is that Bill isn't going to be working directly with me. We have a task force that he's getting assigned to, and he's going to come alongside and coach and mentor a team in our church that I've wanted to and I've longed to, but I just, again, it's more nights and more time, and I just haven't been able to do it. And they've been stalled and they've been struggling, and they just need a pastor to come alongside them. And then the other is a really exciting venture that it just exists in our heads right now, and it's a ministry to a very under-resourced population. And when I first brought this up, I thought, no way in the world does Bill have any experience with this, and you did. And so Bill is working with another person in our church who also has this passion for it. So now it's not just Bill is helping me with the projects I'm working on. There's other projects that Bill is going and really kind of in my place to help, because I would never be able to get these things off the ground. So the impact is much more than just me. It's now really kind of bleeding down into the congregation.
And I'm re-energized.
Yeah. But I think there's another impact too that we missed on here quickly, and that is that for every solo pastor, there's a solo pastor's spouse.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And when we talked about the fact that a solo pastor doesn't have somewhere safe to talk, imagine that solo pastor's spouse. And so one of the very side benefits of pastor-partner, but still I think worth mentioning, is that the partner pastor's spouse is a great mentor relationship, or just a friendly, safe person for the solo pastor's spouse to talk with. And that's another benefit. When you said it's not just helping me, it's helping the congregation. It's also helping the spouse.
Yeah, I know our wives have had some long meals together, and because they understand each other. And as Susan is struggling through things as a mom with kids, and
More being the wife of a pastor.
yeah. But I'm saying, in the context of being the wife of a pastor, and sitting, and when Susan's been able to sit with Gloria, and I think Gloria can just say, you know what, I've been there, and even to say, like, I know what you're going through, like. That just is priceless, what that's meant to her. So, because we haven't had that kind of opportunity here up until now.
Again, being a pastor's wife, while it's a very social position because you're constantly with people, it's also very isolating.
It's wide but shallow. You don't have those good, deep relationships.
Sometimes you find a lay person in the congregation that personality-wise and all you really click with, and that is very renewing and refreshing, and we've had those kind of relationships, but they're still not ministry.
Right.
They can be wonderful on a personal level, but there's a difference with a person who is an ox pulling the same cart.
You know, we talked about how moving forward, there's so many new things and cool things you want to try, and I just want to talk for a minute about how we have gotten response from the congregation already that's been extremely positive about this Pastor Partner project. And so halfway through the project here with First Reformed Church and you, Pastor Bill, as the Pastor Partner, I've already had no less than 2 people in the congregation come up to me and say, are we going to do this again? I want to do this again. I want to give money to Pastor Partner Project, because they saw the incredible benefits from this project and they want to be a part of it again. They're connected to it. It's something that they can see making a difference, and they want to continue to make that difference. And that's been very rewarding for me, because that's what I hoped, and it's proven true. Yeah,
and you know, sometimes after Bill preaches, and Bill's just a fantastic preacher. I'll hear people say, that sermon was just awesome, like, you know, that's the best sermon I've heard in a long time, kind of a thing. And then we'll be like, sorry, sorry, Pastor John, we didn't mean, and I just like, no, like, that's why he's here. Like, it's awesome. Like, we're all growing from this. We're all benefiting, and that's just been, again, just another great blessing and people see that, and people are being ministered to by you, and I think that's part of what's energizing is there is this connection.
Let's talk for just a minute about the real nuts and bolts of what Pastor Partner does. And so, Pastor Bill, you came from that side of a retiring pastor who was looking for, how can I still do work that's meaningful, that I can serve God, but I still need to make some money. And I want flexibility. Most important, I want that flexibility. But maybe you didn't want to go into a different vocation because this is what you knew your whole life.
And love.
And Pastor John, you're in that situation of a solo pastored church that for many years has been a solo pastored church, and looking to grow and looking to revitalize, and I know you've done a lot on revitalizing the church, but you saw firsthand that there was just way more than you could do. And so Pastor Partner is taking those wonderful retired or retiring pastors and matching them with pastors that are solo pastors. And how it does that is through an online matching program. And you can have visions of eHarmony or Match.com, but if you think about a retired pastor that can go to this website, can fill out a form, talk about their bio, maybe upload a sermon that they've done, and put in there what geographic areas they're willing to work in, how many hours a week they want to work, what their specialties are, their education, their denomination, their beliefs. And then a solo pastored church can go on this website, Pastor Partner, and they can search in their geographical area for all of the retired pastors that are available to work. And when they find maybe 3 or 4. They can maybe go out to lunch or invite one to come in and talk with the leadership team and see if that's a good match. And then they can develop, okay, what would we want this pastor partner to do? And everything on this website is set up for training and tools to step you through this whole process, a lot of which we learned through this program between you two. But it would guide them through this whole process and allow this match to happen that would hold each other accountable and responsible through a covenant agreement, and would then allow the church to kind of step out a little bit of its comfort zone and to get revitalized without feeling like they're making a huge commitment, without feeling like they're going to have to let an associate pastor go if they can't afford them, because it's a definitive time frame. So this matching process, having this pool of experienced retired pastors willing to work, and these 80% of the churches in America that are solo pastored that need this help, but maybe can't quite get to that level of hiring another associate pastor, they can get this match, they can present it to the congregation as a project, and then the congregation can see the benefits of this project, and they can use that as a stepping stone to try and eventually get to the point of hiring an associate pastor, so that now the church has proven to itself that it can step out and it can say, this has made such a big difference in our church, and the congregation sees it, and they can say, yes, we need to hire an associate pastor. And so pastor partners is like a stepping stone. It's like weaning it from the bottle. It's helping you to get to that next level without being fearful of what might happen if you were doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the key things about that is, and Bill and I have crossed this bridge a few times, is coming from different denominational backgrounds. I am thoroughly dyed-in-the-wool Reformed, and you are Baptist as they come. So, and I think the thing for us is, theologically, what we said, we guesstimate about 97, 98%. We would agree on, and we would sign off on each other's theology. And there's a little bit that we would disagree on. We're not bringing that up in pulpit. That's not what this is about. And what's been great is that that's not been an issue. That the things that our church has needed, like help with evangelism, help with discipleship, writing journal, providing excellent preaching, giving me opportunities to work with leadership, that has nothing to do with you being a Baptist and me being Reformed. We both have a commitment to the gospel. We have a vision for ministry. We're working together towards that end. And so if anybody is, kind of shaky, and we did have a couple people when they said, a Baptist, what's up with that? They said, weren't there any other Reformed retired pastors? And we said, no, we want the Baptist. We want the Baptist. and I think that was the last time anybody has ever commented on that.
They probably think I've become Reformed.
Well,
it was ordained.
That's one of the great things about Pastor Partner is there's a couple of things that help denominational walls to be broken down.
Yes.
And I think that in today's world, in the culture we live in today, and with the fact that only 2 out of 10 millennials feel that the church is relevant or important, I think way too often the church gets focused on the walls of denominations when that doesn't matter at all to the people that we're trying to reach.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, we could argue about the 2 or 3% denominational difference. But somebody who is not engaged with Christ at all, like they could care less. I mean, exactly. We're arguing about things that aren't even on their radar. Right. And so what we've been able to do is really focus on the essentials and work together, really pulling together in the same direction.
And I might say a lot of people that have a relationship with Christ still don't really care a whole lot about those 3 to 5% differences.
Yeah.
Pastor Partner, part of the program that helps with that denominational lines is that, number one, a church can certainly choose only from retired pastors within their denomination. If they feel that's an issue, then part of the biography of the pastor partner would be their denomination and their denominational beliefs. But as what we've experienced here, that breaking down those denominational barriers has been a plus, has been a very positive thing. And the other part about it is with the covenant agreement, it allows the pastor partner and the senior pastor to form a covenant agreement about exactly what is able to be preached and not. If there is a small denominational difference between them, part of the denominational agreement is, hey, you may be Baptist, but you're coming to work for a Reformed church. So when you do preach or when you do have interaction with the congregation, you're understanding of our denomination's beliefs.
And Bill has done that several times when he's preached. Once even this week, where he's like, I want to talk about a specific thing, and you know, exactly where do you stand on this? And if I were to say this, would it be okay? And we're like, yes, you know. And we found like there's a lot of common language that he can use that we would say like, yes, that's. So I would really caution people who are fearful about crossing denominational lines, because I think of some of the other things that I've been part of, whether it was a mission board or a crisis pregnancy center, things like Samaritan's Person. We easily just go across denominational lines, and we find just a lot of camaraderie, and so it certainly hasn't been an issue here, and that's coming from someone who's, I would say, is a theological stickler. It's not something I just like, well, it doesn't matter, as long as we agree on a few things. I'm pretty particular in my doctrine, and I can say in our relationship, that's never been an issue that we've had to address.
Absolutely, and that sends such an important message, because unfortunately a watching culture sees the competitiveness and the animosity that sometimes exists between people who all claim to love the same Savior, and to allow people to see, well, Jesus said, this is how they'll know you're my disciples, by how you love each other. And for us just to be able to try to model that on all of the big issues, we just stand together, and the mission of Jesus is what's important.
Well said. And that is, again, I've talked about how many benefits pastor partners brings. Breaking down those denominational walls, or at least lowering them so you can see over them and work with each other.
Without having to surrender your distinctives.
Exactly.
I think one of the things that I'd like to challenge those watching this with is to think maybe a little differently about church growth, church trajectory, and whether we're talking about numerical growth or really just kind of qualitative growth, the health and the life and the vitality. And maybe it doesn't mean your church gets bigger, it just means your church grows deeper in faith and people are more committed. What if that wasn't as far away as you thought? What if it was just 6 months or a year, one person stepping up to be a match donor? Really, once you get that rock unstuck, it starts rolling. It's just getting it moving that's the big piece. And I would just say that, it's the Lord's church. His heart is to see it grow and to thrive and to transform lives. And what if it's just that little act of faith to get this unstuck? And as what we've seen, now is our church changed overnight? No. Are we in many ways the church we were when you started? Yes. But I can also point to a number of other things, as we've talked about, that are different. And I do feel that rock is rolling, and now we've got some momentum, and now I see in the next 6 months it really just picking up steam as now you're working with other people and in other things. So that's my challenge. It's if we truly believe that with God all things is possible, then I would say something as small as this, how possible it is and what God can do through that. And this is just one relationship. What if Pastor Partner Project were in 10 churches or 100 churches or 1,000 churches? What might that look like for the kingdom of God?
That's one of the greatest things about the pastor partner concept, is how it can grow without additional cost or infrastructure, because really at its core, Pastor Partner Project is a matching online service that provides teaching, training, and stepping you through the process of a solo pastored church, being able to get hooked up with a pastor partner that can help get that rock unstuck and get it rolling. And language is really its only barrier, because the minute that you had this matching website designed and live and all of the training videos and the forms to allow you to go to your congregation and get funding, and once you have that all in place, it immediately can go to the entire English-speaking community. And short of having it translated, that's really the only barrier of it going worldwide is translation of languages. Because with Pastor Partner, there isn't a funding like the missionary where it's we got to keep funding it forever. With Pastor Partner, once we get the infrastructure built, once we get everything that we need done, then there's very little cost and maintenance to keep it rolling, because all the rest of the costs come within the congregation and the church benefiting it itself. It's not another outside party like so many programs out there have to be funded and have to have continual fundraising campaigns because somebody's got to pay the bill all the time. The great part about Pastor Partner is that all we have to do is keep the matching website maintained so that it can continue to be used.
Well, I love what I would maybe call the portability of Pastor Partner Project, in that an overwhelming percentage of churches in America are less than 100 in worship. So a lot of churches, I think, are going to be very interested in something of this kind. Like, we need that a little extra help. And I think of how portable this is, for a rural church family. What about an inner city church family? It's independent of denominations, it's independent of church size, it's really independent of church budgets, worship styles, all those things. It operates independent of that, and I think you can really kind of just plug this in anywhere and really address some critical needs in ministry.
The simplicity and the flexibility of the model makes it very reproducible.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the thing with Pastor Partner Project that is so exciting to me is that this has the potential to be a real game changer. There's all kinds of ideas out there about how to change a church, how to grow the church, and to be honest, a lot of them are retread or they're just not even biblically based. Yes. This is one where you're putting like-minded people together in leadership to grow the health and the vitality of the church in a very intentional and a specific way, and it can be done everywhere. And I don't know of anything else that has the potential to touch how many thousands of churches this can. I mean, we're not saying this, hey, this is going to be great for mega churches. They're not struggling with this. This is that 80% of all churches who are in this position, the numbers are astronomical. And what if, of those 80%, what if even half of those became healthy, vibrant, growing, vital churches? That would transform not just our landscape as an American church, but it would transform this nation, and it would ripple out into the world. And I mean, that's the vision, I think, of Pastor Partner. It's, as much as I've loved this connection with Bill and we're enjoying it and we're getting a lot out of it, it's let's put this on a global, God-sized scale. And I think that's what's so exciting. That's what gets me really fired up about seeing this grow, because I don't know what else could be done that can touch so many churches in a concrete way. It's not a program. It's not, financially out of reach. It's just real help for real ministry in real churches. And that's what folks like me have been just dying for and waiting for.
Helping to fund this and get it started, specifically the matching aspect of it, is so valuable. God did something special in bringing the three of us together, and the compatibility personally and theologically, and just in what we brought together with our differing skills. But the matching program allows us to have all different kinds of solo pastors, all different kinds of retired pastors, and help them to find each other in a match that can really work. And it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's helping putting those people together.
And what I think is, if you're a solo pastor and you're seeing this, or if you go to a church of a solo pastor, you just have a heart for churches and solo pastors. You know, I'm thinking maybe as you're watching this, you're thinking, I wish they had a bill.
Oh, no, they all want. The retired pastors all want to work with John.
But I'm thinking, you know, if you're thinking like, I wish I had a bill, wouldn't that be just fantastic? And they're probably got 20 things in their head and they're thinking, you know, the solo pastors are, this is what I'd have Bill do, or you have a heart for a solo pastor and say, you know what, I'd love to be able to give that assistance so my pastor, he would get that help and he would help us, you know, that would help us get unstuck. And it really, it's not going to take much to make this happen.
Think about a resource that is probably being just marginally tapped right now. The baby boomer generation is gigantic. And of course, we're going to flood the market of the need for nursing homes and everything else. But there's a gap here where you have this huge number of baby boomer pastors who are ready to retire. But they still have 10 great years or 15 good years or 20. And what a great thing to be able to partner them with someone else and bring those skills together and revitalize the retired pastor and the solo pastor in church.
So pastors who are baby boomers that are nearing retirement also cause another problem in that there needs to be new pastors to replace those. And when, like in your situation, 2 out of 5 are the only ones that are left out of your seminary class, if we're not bringing enough in, and on top of that we're burning them out through the fatigue of a solo pastor situation, we're really going to be in a crisis when they retire. So pastor partner can take advantage of that huge pool of retiring pastors to come alongside and help those new solo pastors, or even the ones that have been there a while, from fatigue and burnout, so that we help to avert that crisis.
Well, and the thing is, where do you think recent seminary graduates, what kind of churches are they going to? Small solo pastor churches.
They're not going to the big mega church.
No, just because statistically the smaller solo pastor churches far outnumber, and that's all that those smaller churches can afford. And so, yeah, it perpetuates the cycle. But what if, pastor partner, you could come in and have that partnership with a young pastor and really give that help out? I think that would just be tremendous.
Wonderful.
And it's so much more than a mentor program, but the mentor aspect of it isn't to be diminished either, because there's certainly a lot of advantage in that experienced senior pastor being able to come alongside and teach and be a safe place for that young pastor to be able to have conversations with. But it's so much more than a mentor program. It's really shouldering the load. It's taking some of the weight, some of the work off, so that pastor can be the best he can be, which makes the church the best it can be.
That's the beauty of the adaptability. You know, John didn't need a mentor. He needed a partner. Some solo pastors need a mentor, but the program can adapt to whatever that need is in the solo pastor.
But Bill, you were saying something earlier I wanted you to get back to about pastors going to conferences.
Yes.
And I've done that and you've done that, and how you would maybe compare that to Pastor Partner Project.
Well, there are conferences available, as you know well, hundreds of them, and they're often billed as, you know, how to grow a great church and things like that. And almost invariably, they're led by these high-profile, you know, sharp personality, mega church leaders. And while they're inspiring, they simply don't deal with the nuts and bolts of being a solo pastor in a church of 100 people.
They're not practically applicable.
No, and frankly, many of the people putting these conferences on have never been a solo pastor in a church of 100.
They're saying this is how our church went from 5,000 to 10,000, and here's the principles, and here's what we did. And then you're like, well, I have, in our church here we have about 175, maybe a little more, but it's like, you're talking about 10,000 people, and if their staff is, literally hundreds of people, and it's me and a few part-timers here, and so I would even say, because I've done those conferences and I get jazzed up about them, and there's great things to learn, and I'm not putting them down at all.
Yes, you can always learn something.
But in terms of like when I come back and I've got my binder, and like you said, you put it on the shelf and then it kind of stays there. Like, I don't remember coming home from a conference and ever saying 6 months later, that changed everything, or that made a big difference in my ministry. And I think of what it would cost in that same amount of time to bring on somebody who would help, who understands where you're coming from and is going to do some of that work. Now we're talking about real change.
Yes.
And I think that's...
And it grows out of a relationship instead of out of a program. And for some of those conferences, the cost of going to the conference, flying across the country, staying in a hotel and eating out, you could fund the pastor partner program for a year,
a good part
or for
of it,
6
yeah.
months of it.
And that's what is so powerful with the scale of pastor partner, being able to scale limited only by language, but yet it starts right here. The difference is the relationship of one pastor to another pastor, that 2 by 2, that's the core difference. Even though the program itself is scalable and large and could be great, none of that happens if it isn't this relationship, because that's what makes the rock come unstuck.
Yeah. And I would say this, for those who are solo pastors, really for this to be able to work is you have to be willing to give away some of your best ideas for somebody else to do it. Because you can't do everything. And I've used with Bill the analogy, I feel like, that since he's come on board, like the statue of the Indian god who's got like, the body and the head and then like 6 or 8 arms, because that's kind of what it feels like is happening. But part of that has been able to say, this is something I've been thinking about and I get excited about. Bill, I know I'm not going to be able to get to it. And just being willing to release that. And you have to be kingdom-minded. I mean, I think that's a big thing. To get in Pastor Project, we talk about denominational differences and what it's really going to take to make this work, the funding. You have to be a kingdom-minded pastor. You have to be a kingdom-minded congregation. You have to be a kingdom-minded giver, and really put that out first, and all for Jesus, first and foremost and only. Yes. And I think when you go into it, you're going to just, what God won't do through that.
And when we talk about the matching process too, one of the important parts of the matching process is pastor partner having the steps, the proper steps to take in that matching process that we've learned through our experience together and through thought and prayer, but also having that step clear so that somebody understands that part of it should be prayerful consideration of this match, meaning the leadership team, the pastor, they should be praying about this particular match. Is it the right match? Because if you're in it kingdom-minded and that's your focus, you're going to get the answers.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. The Holy Spirit has to be involved in this process. And in forming this match, it's more than just eHarmony putting 2 people together who like to play tennis. And so built into this process will be the encouragement and hopefully the practical help on praying and letting God guide you and build in this relationship.
When I think of where this can go and where God will bring this, and when I look back at the 1.5 years ago when I first started on this journey and think of where we are today and how excited it makes me to see that everything about this God has just blessed, everything about this, and everything keeps coming up positive for His kingdom. I think about some of the great technological or software marvels of our modern age, like eHarmony or eBay or Craigslist, or some of these things that just took off because it matched two people that had a need, or one person wanted to buy something, one person wanted to sell something, and how big they became because they did the most simple thing. They matched two people over and over again.
Yeah, two people who otherwise would not have found each other.
Exactly.
That's right.
And I think that's the thing. And Bill, you just mentioned earlier that we'd actually met about 8-9 years ago, and we had a very wonderful encounter over a tragic circumstance. We both were doing ministry side by side, and then we went our own ways. All that time, you know, I've been here kind of working, you've been down the road, and you finished up your ministry, and you've been retired, and there was no Craigslist, there was no eBay, there was no eHarmony. You were that for us, and you know, we're so fortunate that you were able to fulfill that role. But I do think of how many of hundreds of thousands of other pastors don't have a Scott who says, oh, I know you and I know you, and I'm going to put you together, and God gave me this idea. And so what if we could roll this out to so many others?
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing that we knew each other, we'd done ministry together, but otherwise we would have never been connected if it wasn't for the project.
And I think that beyond the connection also, it's the awareness of the problem. In other words, it wasn't until I think you and I, or the three of us, really started talking about this, and I know Pastor John, I talked with you a little bit about it from your perspective, and Pastor Bill, I spoke with you about it on several occasions from your perspective, and the more I spoke with each of you individually, the more I was like, whoa, these are two, you know, these two need to get together. And so then we started meeting together, and things just really started to flourish and connect, and we started to realize that need. I don't think any of us realized that need even close to the level that we realize it right now.
Yeah, so when we stepped into this, I thought, this is great, you know, Bill can help out, and we'll, you know, this will be nice to just have a little, I didn't realize the layers of the blessing and what it would mean for me and to develop other people, and what it would mean for me to have time off, and for me to be able to sit with my wife, and for me to see ministries that have only ever existed in here come to fruition. I was just thinking, oh, it's going to be great to have somebody else to help out.
And you know, one of the things that I thought, well, in my retirement, perhaps I can do some consulting with pastors and churches, and I've had a privilege of doing some of that. But it's so different. Even in a setting where I go into a church, I maybe visit there 3 weekends, meet with the different groups, analyze, come back and dump this paper on them, and you know, here's the things I heard from you, this is what you ought to do about it, goodbye.
Yeah. And they still have to get it done.
Yes, and realistically, I'm looking back and saying, I wonder how much, if anything, ever really happened out of that.
Because they're probably overworked, and they
Exactly.
probably have more on their plate than they can possibly deal with.
Yeah, that's now just number 205 and 206 on their list of things to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the relationship and partnership like this has been, I think, so much more productive in its potential.
And you probably have felt more energized and revitalized because you actually see what you're doing making a difference, instead of just consulting and providing a paper that tells them what they need to do, which you then leave and never get to go back and see if it made a difference or not. Here, you're actually involved in making a difference.
Yes.
So gentlemen, as we wrap up and we talk about the next steps for Pastor Partner, I know we're very excited about continuing your relationship. John, you actually know some people you spoke with that have great interest in this program and maybe want to be part of it also, starting another beta test. But our real next big step is to make this a reality, to make this matching website, training videos, process for how a church can do this. Make it real, and that's going to take money. And so what we're looking for is somebody who can catch the passion of what we have seen here and how powerful this can be, and wants to get behind it and say, I want to make that happen. If you have an interest in this, I'd really encourage you to reach out. We're looking for people who want to partner with us to help get this up and going, whether that's partnering on the founding board or partnering with getting this website built and the costs to do it.